So, brethren, it's a pleasure being here once again tonight. And I know last week I gave proof number 5, and that topic covered the righteousness of the law and the righteousness of faith can never be the same, as can be seen from 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 to 3. And tonight I'll be giving proof number 6. And it will be speaking on the righteousness of the law and the righteousness of faith can never be the same, since they are the products of two different callings, one being an earthly in Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, and Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 to 21, and Psalm 105, verses 9 to 11. The other being an heavenly, which is Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. Now, all scriptures will be read from the King James Version Bible only. So, brethren, tonight's segment is not going to be long, it's going to be pretty short. And I do hope that the verses that are being shared are actually researched and read upon, on your own free time. So, I'll start, brethren. When one remembers that God is a God of purpose and that his operations on planet Earth are accordingly tailored to achieving certain specific objectives, the topic referred to in proof number 6, these verses become all the more relevant indeed. With this in mind, let us consider particularly the text that I've mentioned in the topic to see whether my stated position is true or not. And if true, we should seek to find out what strategies God employed in order to achieve his desired objectives. From Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, and Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 to 21, and Psalm 105, verses 9 to 11, we can clearly see that God's plan for national Israel was to give them the land of Palestine, from the river Nile in Egypt to the river Euphrates in Iraq, for an inheritance as long as the sun and the moon shall last. Now, since the land in question was already occupied by certain inhabitants, in order for God to achieve his objective of giving the mentioned land to Israel, it also meant that those nations which were then occupying that land had to be displaced. By so doing, God was surely demonstrating his sovereignty over the nations of planet Earth. With respect to those specific strategies undertaken by him to ensuring the fulfillment of his plan, one observes that, having brought Abram into the promised land, God made a covenant with him. The following quote speaks unambiguously to this issue under review. So I'm reading Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, which states, "In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates." So that's Genesis chapter 15, verse 18. Following the making of this divine covenant between God and Abram, one would have expected that life for Abram would have become a bed of roses. But that was not to be. For no sooner had the covenant been made than the manifestation of Abram's lack of the knowledge of the strategies of God became apparent. For instead of inquiring from God to find out whether Sarah's advice was his will, he took his wife's carnal advice and so fathered Ishmael through his wife's handmaid, Hagar. And what a tragedy! What a calamity! For even today, the effects of that mistake are negatively impacting the peoples of the world in general, but Abraham's descendants in the Middle East in particular. Now, a question is in order. Did God allow that mentioned mistake I spoke about prior of Abram to derail his plans to give the land of Palestine to him and his seed for an everlasting inheritance? That is my question. Did God allow the mistake of Abram that I just mentioned, that he fathering um, his handmaid, to derail his plans to give the land of Palestine to him and his seed for an everlasting inheritance? And the answer to that question is no, not at all. Moreover, in order to ensure that his original plan came to fruition, God added the covenant of circumcision to his original covenant. This fact can be verified by reading Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 to 21, then Genesis chapter 17, verse 7 through 13. Points worth noting in this second covenant are hereinafter mentioned. Firstly, unlike the original covenant of Genesis 15, verse 18, which made Abram the beneficiary without his having to do anything to access same, in the amended covenant of circumcision, Abram was told the following: Walk before me and be thou perfect, and I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. So that was Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 to 2. Secondly, meaning, secondly, God changed Abram and Sarah's names to Abraham and Sarah, meaning father of nations and princess, respectively. By so doing, God placed them on a path of walking in agreement with Him by saying what He said about them. Thirdly, to ensure that Abraham's compliance with this amended covenant was secured, God instituted the ordinance of circumcision of the flesh, which was a sign or token of the righteousness of the faith, which He exercised before He was circumcised. Read Romans chapter 4, verse 11, if in doubt. Now, the following institution of the covenant of circumcision of the flesh: Abraham fathered Isaac, who fathered Esau and Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel, who subsequently fathered the 12 tribes of Israel. As time elapsed, the children of Israel became bond slaves in Egypt and remained there for some 400 years. However, in the 430th year of their captivity, God delivered them as was promised in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 to 16. Relevant to our discourse, therefore, a question is in order, namely, and the question I'm going to ask you, brethren, is this: Did God change his plans of giving the land of Canaan to Abraham's descendants for an everlasting possession? And the answer to that question is no, not at all. Well, what strategies, and this is my second question to you, well, what strategies did he employ to ensure the fulfillment of his objectives? That is my question. And I repeat, well, what strategies did he employ to ensure the fulfillment of his objectives? And the answer is: the following information is of vital importance to all who genuinely desire to divide rightly the word of truth. As he previously did to Abraham, by adding circumcision of the flesh to his original Genesis chapter 15, verse 18 covenant, he added the Sabbath covenants, which can be found in Exodus chapter 31, verses 16 to 17, and later the law, even the Ten Commandments, with its attendant ordinances under the Levitical priesthood, to those original covenants which he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, what I would like for you to do, brethren, is turn to Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 to 13, Genesis chapter 26, verses 2 to 5, Genesis chapter 28, verses 12 to 15, Exodus chapter 31, verses 16 to 17, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 1 to 22, especially verse 22, and be convinced that this is what God did. Brethren, to confirm the fact that national Israel's calling was an earthly one, we see evidence of same in Romans chapter 11, verses 25 to 32, where God's plan for Israel, as opposed to that of the church, is highlighted. And I would like you to read at your own time. However, before I deal with the church's calling, permit me to draw your attention to the fact that my stated conclusion prior is not religious speculation, but a fact of history. For in keeping with God's original plan to give the land of Palestine to Abraham's descendants, meaning the children of Israel, for an everlasting possession, we saw that, notwithstanding the fact that the Israelites were dispersed among the nations of the world for almost 2 millennia, in 1948, the 14th of May, the modern nation of Israel was born and has played a major role in the affairs of planet Earth to this day. Now, although Abraham's physical descendants have not obtained all the land which God originally promised them, we know that in the not too distant future, God's promise of giving the land of Canaan to Abraham's seed through Isaac for an everlasting possession, as recorded in Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 13 to 18, Psalm 105, verses 8 to 11, Isaiah chapter 43, verses 3 to 6, Jeremiah chapter 16, verses 14 to 15, Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 7 to 8, Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 33 to 42, Hosea chapter 6, verses 1 to 2, Amos chapter 9, verses 13 to 15, Zechariah chapter 8, verses 1 to 15, Zechariah chapter 12, verse 6, to list a few of the too numerous to mention supportive texts, shall become a reality. Now, unlike Abraham's physical descendants, who had an earthly inheritance held out to them, the Church of Jesus Christ, Abraham's spiritual descendants with its heavenly calling, enjoys a better covenantal agreement enjoined to it by God than the one he made with the Israelites. This fact is made clear in Hebrews chapter 8, verses 16 to 13, and Hebrews chapter 10, verses 9 to 10. Not only are the differences of the two kinds of righteousness of God highlighted by the differences in the covenants that establish them, an intrinsic difference is highlighted by the fact that the two covenants which establish both callings, even the earthly and the heavenly, are headed up by two different individuals. This fact is made abundantly clear to anyone who reads Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. In closing, however, I must hasten to re-emphasize the fact that while Israel's inheritance is limited to the promised land of Palestine, the church, on the other hand, had held out to it all things, as 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 21 to 22, and Revelation chapter 21, verse 7, because of the difference in inheritance which is associated with these two different callings catalogued in Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. We can also expect to see other peculiarities associated with each respective calling. Moreover, brethren and online listeners, as I come to an end, since the callings under review, the earthly and the heavenly, are secured by two distinct covenants, the first and second covenants, respectively, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1 and read, Then Deuteronomy chapter 9. No, sorry. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1. And then you go to verses 9 to 13. And then Hebrews chapter 8, verses 6 to 7. And then you read verse 13, which gives self-righteousness and the righteousness of faith, respectively. So turn also to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 24 to 25, Philippians chapter 3, verse 9a, compared with Romans chapter 3, verses 21 to 22, Philippians chapter 3, verse 9b. We know beyond the shadow of a doubt that the righteousness of the law and the righteousness of faith can never be the same. So that's the end of my segment today, brethren. I will be live next week again. Please prepare yourselves for the return of Jesus Christ because he will be returning soon. And brethren, every scripture that's shared tonight, I do hope that you spend some time reading the Holy Bible and spending time understanding the scriptures because we are going to need the Bible. We are going to need the scriptures for what lies ahead for all those who stand strongly, believing and holding on to the promises of God. So, brethren, have a safe and productive week. Remember that Jesus Christ loves you and I love you too. So, bye for now.